Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt. I do a motorcycle racing TV show, Team Chicago Challenge. My email is teamdan45@gmail.com. My website is teamchicago.tv. We're at Pennsboro Raceway in West Virginia. We're about 30 miles from Ohio. I've raced in West Virginia many times at Summit Point, which is on the other end of West Virginia. But this is a racer reunion, an opportunity to talk to some of the racers, look at some of these great motorcycles. I caught some of the conversation inside the tent. There's probably 200 to 300 enthusiasts here. They even got a chance to look at the race cars. So this is a very famous racetrack. I never even knew it existed. I'm having a great time. And there's nothing like being around flat track racers like myself. And I'm so fortunate to be able to put this together. And don't forget my email. It's teamdan45@gmail.com. This is basically a reunion for flat track motorcycle enthusiasts and racers. We are looking at an Indian Scout 750 twin between the 50s and into the 60s. These are the bikes that raced. You notice that these have a rigid tail rear end, a simple front suspension, 750 flathead engines. I don't know who number 60 was, but this is Everett Brashier's 500 overhead valve BSA Gold Star. So it was overhead valve engines limited to 500 cc's and 750 twins that were flatheads. After 1968 or so, 750s could have overhead valve. We're looking at an XR 750 Harley, twin motorcycle, bike that dominated, running short track, a Botaco Astro, another bike that dominated short track racing in the 70s and into the 80s, and then a 600 Rotex single cylinder race bike. And to put this all together, I had a chance to talk to an author of a few books about flat track racing, Greg Rearson. Let's go to that right now.
My name's Greg Rearson, lifelong motorcycle racing enthusiast, history major in school. I think the impetus for the book was I helped with the Charity Newsies reunion, Charity Newsies revival in 2006, a race there. And so I met Bobby Hill and Dick Clamfith and Ronnie Rawl and some of the racers from the 50s and 60s. And nobody had ever really done a book about the Grand National Series. And I wanted to talk to these guys before they were gone. So that was the reason I started with the first volume, covered 54 to 69, the start of the modern Grand National Series.
Okay, well, I remember, because I interviewed Gary Nixon. I got a 3-part interview with Gary Nixon. And back then I went online and I found a site that had all the results from the Nationals, and all of a sudden I can't find that anymore. So I'm happy to hear that you did a book, and then Bert Sumner's is keeping track of all the records, because
Stats.
I ended up sending him 15 of my rule books from the AMA.
Yeah.
So whatever, just like things like when did they go to 250s on the short track?
Right.
When did they go to 750s on the overhead valve engines?
Right.
And why did Harley build the XR 750? So those are things. All right. So your first volume, tell me about your first volume. Start with what year?
54, which was the start of the modern point system. Before that, before 54, you got number one by winning the Springfield Mile, one race a year.
Was that just the end one, or the one in the fall?
Probably the one probably the one like Labor Day and into the fall.
Right.
Yeah. Towards the end of the season, and I think it was that from like post World War II up until 54. Mm-hmm. Bill Tooman winning the last one on a hand-shipped Indian.
Okay. In fact, I just did a show at the On Any Sunday Museum, and he's got a replica of that Indian.
That right. Of course, ironically, what's funny, if you applied the 54 point system to 53, Tooman would have still won. Mm-hmm. So it's just a kind of a rare thing because, mile you had specialists come out and all this. So Tooman legitimately, to me, would have been number one anyway. So I wanted to cover that, and you start at 54 and go just to a reasonable length of the book. A reasonable length of the book being 632 pages, 237 races. So pretty comprehensive. It's got previews of each season, the racetracks, the history of the racetracks, the story of the races, kind of like Cycle News. I'm a 70s kid, grew up with Cycle News, so it's kind of modeled after that. The results, the points battles that were going on, and then at the end of each race coverage, I usually have some trivia that happened in a race that didn't necessarily fit in the story.
So where did you get this information? Just by reading AMA magazine? And
I was fortunate enough to talk my way into the AMA museum, into the archives, and Mark Modersky that helped me today, and hosted the panel discussion, was somewhat reluctant at first, but so he let me into the archives at the AMA, so I had access to all the cycle news, all the AMA news, all the magazines, and some actual AMA records, but the majority of it probably came from the cycle news. And the peer articles. So
you basically, each year you covered each national during that year.
Yep.
And put little highlights in. So can you, off the top of your head, can you go through in volume 1, who is number 1 every year?
Oh, well, not off the top of my head. I'd have to look. It's too much pressure.
Give me a good guess. So you said Tooman in 54.
I mean, the dominant guys of the year, I'll put it that way. Joe Leonard was a 3-time number 1. Dick Mann, 2-time number 1. Nixon,
2-time number 1.
2-time number 1. Those were probably the dominant guys. Riemann was champ, but those to me were the dominant guys of that period.
Right, Roger Riemann from
Roger
Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know all about the Gary Nixon thing because I sat Gary down 3 hours. I sell the DVD. It's 3 hours. Each one's 1 hour long, and I think that really captures exactly what went on during those years.
Mm-hmm.
He got into racing, I guess, in '61 maybe. He said he didn't get to run on the beach. He was 1 year late running on the beach, because that was another thing that took place. And they ran on the beach they ran on the beach before the war, and then they ran on the beach all the way through 61. I think 61. And then even at the new Speedway, they ran many different configurations.
They didn't start running onto the banking until it got later in the 60s.
Right. Okay, so volume 1 is those years. Then what did you?
70 to 75.
Okay.
Which the first one was like 16 years.
Did the point system change at all over those years?
And through the 50s, it didn't. It didn't really start changing until you got into the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And that played a huge role on who became champion and so forth. Because the point system, the first one was just dead simple. It didn't matter if it was Daytona or Ascot or Columbus. It was like 9, 8, 7, 6, just real simple. It started getting real complicated as it got into the 70s, and they went through probably 3 or 4 different point systems. It really favored, you got the 70s, it favored, because they based it partly on purse, so they really favored road racing. You could finish 12th at Daytona and earn more points than a guy who won a half mile.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So that's why.
So the money depended on, the points were related to the money?
Related to the purse and the size and the length of the race.
Right,
of course, played into road race's favor. And that's why you had so many guys. Nixon was really not capable of running a serious Grand National Championship campaign after he got hurt in '69. Except in '73, they had like 9 road races. A ton of road races. So there were so many road races, and they paid so many points Nixon was a genuine contender, even though he wasn't the dirt tracker he was before.
And then the other thing we should mention that eventually road racing got separated out. So what year was that it got?
85 was the last year of the combined series. 86.
Right. So how many books have you done?
I've just done 2. I've done 2 on Grand National, and I've done 1 on Ascot. Just the results.
Okay.
From 69 to 90.
Okay. So you haven't done anything.
I'm working on Grand National Volume 3.
Okay.
But I just, through getting ready to try to retire and working 50 hours a week, I've just made a dent in it. So I still have a long ways to go on that. I've got all the material gathered, but
you were working when you did the first 3.
I'm working on it when I get the time, and
right.
It may be till I'm able to retire that I can finish Volume 3, and I'd like to do it. I'd like to do it clear through the end of the Grand National period, which is 85.
Right.
That's the last year of the combined series.
Oh, okay. So at 85 is when road racing got removed?
That was the last year it was combined.
Okay.
86 was separate.
Where it just became dirt track.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Grand Slam doesn't exist anymore, because when I talked to Gary Nixon, I got good stories too.
Nixon was a story.
When I talked to Nixon almost would have been the first one to win the Grand Slam if he would have won Peoria, which he led
every lap except the last one.
And he thought it was Marco. He said, I thought it was Marco, and I got on the gas, I spun up, but it was Dick Mann that got by him.
Yep.
So, and then Dick Mann became the first one to win the Grand Slam. Right. So let's explain the Grand Slam. The Grand Slam is
the Grand Slam is you win every discipline that they offer.
You win short track, half mile, mile, TT, and road race.
Yeah.
So Dick Mann won it, and when I interviewed Dick Mann, and I said, well, you're the first one to do it, and he says, yeah, but it took me
18 years.
18 years. He said Kenny Roberts did it in 2 seasons or something.
He did it in 2 seasons, and then he did it twice. In 75, he did it in 1 season.
So what do you think on, did you like the earlier, what would be your opinion of what you thought was greater? As far as counting all 5 or reducing it down to 4 and get rid of road racing?
I'm not sure I got the question, was it?
Well, when they got rid of road racing, that changed the whole.
It did, but you got to keep this in mind too: is that they were already almost a separate series by the mid '70s, because you had to have an XR 750, the dirt track, you had to have TZ 750, road race, and most guys could not afford both.
Right.
They couldn't unless you had a sponsor. You couldn't do both. And the biggest game changer in Grand National racing was Jay Springsteen, because he came along in '76. He was the first national champion to not earn points road racing.
Oh yes, right. So
it showed then, him winning that without road racing showed all these other dirt track guys.
Right.
Hell, I don't have to.
Right.
I don't have to risk my neck and hawk the house to buy a TZ 750.
Right.
I can do this, and that's when Eklund came in, and the privateers were really strong in the late '70s and early '80s. When Springsteen wasn't healthy anyway.
Right.
You know. So yeah, Springsteen was the game changer.
So what is your racing experience?
Just amateur and vintage. You know, I've had an Astro. My dad bought me an Astro at Springfield, Ohio, 1978. Which I had for 40 years. I finally sold. But just played around amateur, and then when the ARMA stuff got big, and you know, I started vintage racing, and you know, mid packer at best, you know, and but kind of like what you talked about. I was better at 50 years old than I was at 30, because we bought a farm and I put a track in and I practiced all the time.
Oh, okay.
So I was a hell of a lot better at 50 than I was in my 30s.
Well, the one thing that, and I learned this from talking to guys from Michigan too. In fact, when I talked to Charlie Chappell was a great short track racer.
Good guy.
And he was sponsored by Neil King.
Right.
And when I talked to him, he said, well, when we went to the first race at Houston, he said, we almost had an advantage over everybody else, because we would go out on the ice.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
And wear out engines on the ice, so they would have, you know, hundreds of laps go down to Houston, and they would be ready to go.
Sure.
Whereas a guy that just maybe just rode around trail riding and didn't have that ready to go. So
Oh yeah, that's why Jack Ward and all those guys were so
Right.
fast.
no, Jack Warren. Well, I made a comment to Jack Warren. Jack Warren's one of the people here, and I said to him, I said, Jack, did you win more half miles than anybody? Because I've seen him win many half miles.
He was dominant.
And he says, no, I think Ronnie Rawl won.
Because Ronnie was probably the only guy who would beat Jack. You know, maybe Roeder back in the late 60s.
Right.
But when you got into the 70s when Roeder quit,
Right.
you know, it would be those two.
Right. So your book, how can people find out about your book?
It's my friend Bert Sumner, who you mentioned. I'm
Right.
tight with Bert Sumner. We've kind of my dad nicknamed us the History Amigos, along with Bob Herrick, who is a big history guy. But you can go to Bert Sumner's website, the Dairyland Classic. I think dairylandclassic.com. Don't quote me on
Dairyland.
Classic.
Right.
But if you put in Dairyland Classic and history books, you'll see all my books and also what Bob Herrick has as well.
Okay. And has it been a good seller? I mean, have you made a little money or?
Well, a little bit, you know.
Right.
It's a labor of love kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, I've sold between the three books, probably around 10,000 books. It's not for everybody. It's a niche.
Right.
You know, flat track's a niche thing. Grand National's a niche thing now.
Right.
We weren't once we were pretty well known, but that wasn't my real reason. It was just to document the history and talk to guys like Tooman and Bobby Hill and all those before they passed on.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to do that. And it's been a how it is. It's getting to know Gary Nixon. Gary Nixon helped me with my first book. Getting to know these guys and preserving that history was what it was really about.
Well, the other thing that I did the Peoria history, and I took I just did a show from the On Any Sunday Museum. My TV show is based on that movie. I do a weekly television show, and I do most of the narrations, but I get the race. I mean, Bruce Brown did not race. I at least get the race, and I've been very lucky to race. Okay, so any website or anything where people can...
Just Bert's
Just
Dairyland Classic.
Okay.
And I'm on Facebook, and people reach me, send me a message through that.
So what's your Facebook?
Just my name, but my email's GNCBook, Grand National Championship Book, at AOL.com.
Right.
So they can reach me there too.
That's great. Thank you, Greg, for all that great information. One of the fans put together this board honoring my good friend, the late great Gary Nixon. There's also a Norton motorcycle that was owned by Dick Clanford. Now, Dick Clanford won the 200-mile Daytona race on the beach 3 times. Gary Nixon won the race in the Speedway, and he won quite a few 250 races at the Speedway on a 250 Yamaha. And now I had the chance to talk to one of my old friends, one of the greatest flat track racers ever, Steve Morehead.
Steve Morehead, first year professional rider, 1972.
Well, that's what I thought, because I got my license in 1972 also. But like I've said, I knew nothing about motorcycle racing. I mean, I knew it existed, but I didn't know there was professional racing. And in Chicago, we had Santa Fe Speedway that ran professional racing every Wednesday night. So I went out to a race one time in 1970, and I said, I got to do this. I thought it was the coolest thing I ever seen. So how did you get into it that you got your license finally in 72?
Well, I started riding a little 100cc Hodak at the age of 8 years old around the backyard of our house, and my father, he was at an amateur level, and I'd go to the races on the weekends and watch him compete on a 175, 200cc Bultaco. We had 7 or 8 other individuals from my hometown of Findlay, Ohio, that would race. So when I got to be 10 years old, I was able to convince my mom to let me try it. Then I started amateur racing, and I did that every weekend up till I was 16 years old. I could obtain a professional license, and then I went to my first pro race in Lime, Ohio, and seen the likes of George Roeder and Ronnie Rawl on a half-mile limestone cushion racetrack, and I thought, wow, that's something I want to be or do, and I want to be one of those guys when I grow up.
So you started out as a novice in '72, and you started with an OSA first.
Yes, I started out with an OSA.
Did you have a DMR? Or
yes, DMR OSA.
Okay.
And then started by the first 3 or 4 races, and then Tom Cummings come down out of the state of Flint, out of Michigan, with a TDC Yamaha twin, and I couldn't run with him. The thing was just so daggone fast. So 2 weeks later, we had built me one of those things, and went out there and shoot, I won 16 straight races on that twin and ended up top novice in the United States that year.
Well, I'm not totally sure, but I know I was in Ohio, and I was racing. I could have been in the same heat race with you, and I was running 3rd or 4th, and my bike seized, broke the connecting rod, put a hole in the crank, or a hole in the cases, and then I learned about, two-strokes are not as reliable as racing my Triumph, because when I was an amateur, I raced my Triumph. So having a twin, was that the big advantage at that time?
Oh, at that time, because the bikes were just so daggone fast, and the racetracks, were cushion racetracks where you had a lot of material, moisture on the track where you could use the horsepower. But yeah, it was fun. It was a lot
so
of
you
fun.
didn't come to Santa Fe and run any, did you, or did you?
Not till probably my expert year. So
Okay.
I was junior in '73 and turned expert in '74, and then I would venture off into Chicago, and run Santa Fe Speedway on the Wednesday nights just to kind of tune up for the national night that they'd have there.
Well, Santa Fe, being in Chicago, believe me, it was the greatest. I think the 1970s, well, guys who argued that the 60s might have been just as good, but there was a lot of racing. I think in my freshman year, I think I ran 52 races, counting Santa Fe, because Santa Fe was every Wednesday night, and then TTs on Fridays. And then my second year, I didn't make my points. So you made your points because you were the top novice. Let me ask you one other question. We're talk about Ohio. The first race of the year was always Springfield.
Correct.
Okay. I went one time, and my audience should enjoy this. There'd be 15 to 18 novice heat races, correct?
Correct.
You had to win your heat race and be the top 12 fast ones to make the final.
Event. Yes.
Did you win your first one,
Yes.
or you did?
Yeah.
Did you win the final then?
Yeah.
Because I know it's like going to Daytona. When you would go to Daytona as a novice, there'd be 35. They had a novice only short track, and there'd be 35 heat races, and it was just as insane.
Yeah, it was very competitive back in the day.
Yeah, we were very blessed to be able to come through that era. I think it was the greatest era that I can remember.
I agree with you 100%.
Well, it's great talking to you, and I hope we run into each other again. And I came pretty far to come to this event, and I was hoping I had a chance to talk to you.
Well, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve. And here's a picture of Steve on that twin Yamaha when he was a novice dominating the racing in Ohio. This picture here is Roger Crump, number 4C, and Steve, either as a junior or first year expert, 44F. Here's Steve at an indoor back in 73 and 74. He ran a good number of indoor races, either Cobo Hall or Cincinnati. Here's Steve racing with Mike Kidd, 72, Corky Keener, 62, and Ted Booty, number 12. 1, 2, 3, and Steve. And the final picture is what it's all about. On the power, coming out of the corner, feet on the pegs. And now we're going to a Psycho News TV show with Dave Despain from 1990.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Despain. We're at Louisville Downs in Louisville, Kentucky, where the flesh and blood ponies have to make way today for the iron horses of the American Motorcyclist Association. There'll be some guys gambling here today at 100 miles an hour, running for the right to be Grand National Champion and win a Camel Pro Series bonus of $100,000. Picking a winner? I'd say all bets are off. We can tell you who won this race a year ago. That's our Grand National flashback, recalling the victory by number 42, Steve Morehead, over number 1, Scott Parker. It was 2 in the morning when they ran the main. It rained last year, too, delaying the race. And Morehead talked about all that bumping that went on.
Well, that's why we're professional racers. We can run elbow to elbow and bump on occasion and not take one another out of the park. So it's a racing accident. You know, it's an incident where if a rider's trying to pull down on top of another rider and you're racing on a 2-foot wide groove, if I have to shut off and wait for him to gather it up to get going, well then I'm in the same predicament to try to pass him. So my idea is to block that line in the racetrack's mind till he can get by it.
And so after the race, the guy who comes out best in that bump is always happy and says it was just racing, and the guy who comes out second always figures that he got the bum deal and it was rough riding, and you're mad at each other and you holler at each other and you seem like you get it all out of your system and then forget about it. Is that really the way it works?
Well, everybody's hot, but thanks to RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company and this Camel Pro Series, there's $21,000 up for grabs. So naturally you get a little irritated when somebody brushes you as they go by, but you have to look at the facility. It's not like we're using the whole 80-foot wide racetrack, you know, to run on. So when the things get down to a 2-foot narrow groove, and you know, racing incidents happen. That's why we're all professionals, and we go on. We'll all be back next week. We're not out here to try to hurt one another, or by all means take any chances like that at all. So we're all good racing friends, and you know, what happens on the track happens. But we're all friends, and we'll go on to the next week.
Now, Steve did not win Louisville in 1990, but during his career, he won 23 national championship races, and he is one of the top flat track racers ever. And I want to thank my friend Dave Despain for giving me permission to use his Cycle News TV footage, and I have a bubblehead that he sent me. To contact Greg Rearson for more information on GNC books at AOL.com or DairylandClassic.com. To find out more information on Steve Morehead, go to Facebook, Steve Morehead 42. Steve Morehead 42 on Facebook. I had a great time at the Racer Reunion in West Virginia. Contact me, and I love to hear from my audience. It's teamdan45@gmail.com. Remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action, Dan Schmitt Politics, to learn what makes America great. And I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum. They're in Winamac, Indiana, 4 miles south of North Judson on Indiana Highway 39. But give them a call first at 574-896-3172. It's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles. And to pick up your copy of the Team Chicago History Package, go to Rich's Yamaha in Lockport, Illinois. But give them a call first at 815-838-8130. Their website is richesyamaha.com. Pick up your package of the Team Chicago History Package. And if you want to know everything there is to know about motorcycles, there's nothing like going to a swap meet. Here's a few dates: Oregon, Illinois; Springfield, Ohio; Shepherdsville, Kentucky; Woodstock, Illinois; Martinsville, Indiana. And the one in Oregon is at the Rock River Riders Club Ground across the road from White Pines State Park.